Welcome everyone. This is Joe Armstrong and the Power Systems Virtual User Group webinar. And for May, just want to say hi to y'all. Welcome happy spring. May is kind of a big month for me. It's my service anniversary at IBM. Service anniversary in '94, so this month marked 27 years for me working at IBM. And also May happens to be my anniversary, so 39 years of marriage this weekend. So to my sweet wife. And today we got a big day for the webinar. So we're going to talk about Ibm I. A little different. We don't cover Ibm I specific stuff very often, but I get a lot of requests for it. Actually, when it was the AIX user group, I got requests all the time for Ibm I. So we're super happy here to have Steve Will, Chief Architect for the Ibm I operating system. And we're going to talk today about next gen and the cloud, a little bit about cloud stuff. So before we get into that, I do have one kind of announcement. We have several experts within IBM, of course, and one of them, Joe Cropper, talks a lot about hybrid cloud. And this isn't specific to Ibm I, but hybrid cloud in general. And I'll even go so far as to say this isn't even just IBM hybrid cloud, but just kind of hybrid cloud. Joe has started up, there's a group, a LinkedIn group that's just about hybrid cloud. So this isn't a salesy kind of group or anything like that, but people who want to network and fellow technologists that want to just talk about hybrid cloud from around the world. So if you're interested in that, I'm going to post a link to that. There's a little video and a link to the group. So I'll post that in the chat session once we get going here, all right? And if you're interested in just kind of being part of this hybrid cloud group, you can look into that and join that. So with that, a couple other things. We have in the WebEx event thing, we have two panes. There's a chat pane and a Q&A pane. So if you have questions, please post them in the Q&A pane, all right? We'll kind of monitor that for questions. Everything else you can post in the chat pane and chit-chat that way. The presentation materials that Steve is going to go over are on the wiki, the user group wiki. So if you don't have a link to that, any of the emails I send out have that, and I can post that as well. So, and I did start a recording, so we are recording this session, and I'll put the link on the wiki as well once we get going. So with that, let me introduce Steve Will. As I said, Steve's the Chief Architect for Ibm I, and of course Ibm I runs on Power Systems. Steve's been in this role since 2007, and as far back as I can remember, in fact 2007 was when I started doing this job, so as far back as I can remember really doing this job, I was in development before that. Steve's been a Chief Architect working on Ibm I, and he's been working on its predecessors, the AS400 and everything since before then. Steve works on enhancements, deciding which enhancements. He has a whole group of people that he works with, just building the Ibm I, moving it forward, modernizing it, making it so that it is the OS that it started at and has come to be where it's at today, still relevant and still solving business needs and helping our customers. So this is really good. Steve is, of course, an award-winning speaker. He speaks at all kinds of events. We were talking about that a little bit before the session here. And he has a blog, and he's changed that recently, or at least since last time he spoke for the user group. So I'll post that in the chat session as well, and I'm sure he has it on his slides here, so you can see it with that. So with that, Steve, you're all set up here. I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks very much. Really appreciate it, Joe. It's good to get a chance to talk to this group again. I think the last time I spoke was not quite a year ago when I did a technical overview of the 7.4 release. This presentation is more directional and strategic. We're going to talk about Ibm I Next Gen applications. You may not have heard that phrase before. It's something that we've begun to use, and I'll explain how we came to it and what it means as opposed to, say, straight modernization and so on. And we're definitely going to talk about Ibm I and the cloud as it relates to the next gen applications topic. I do want to give us a background, a starting point, though, that talks about why are we talking about this in the first place anyway. And to do that, I think I'll summarize for those of you who aren't quite aware of what IBM I's business is. Now, if you've seen me present in the last several years at conferences, you probably see me present a slide that looks very much like this, and the top 4 bullets are the same. We have clients all over the world using all sorts of written and spoken languages, and clients of all sizes. I know personally a client who uses IBM I who runs a fruit picking company, and normally in the normal part of the year they have 5 full-time employees, and somebody has as part of a small part of their job keeping IBM I up and running the applications on there. So it's a small company with obviously a big job to do, but a small company. Then again, we have clients who have hundreds of thousands of employees who run their primary workloads on IBM I. So this platform is used up and down the spectrum. We therefore have small systems we run on, and some of the very largest power systems that are configured out there are using IBM I. That's still the same. So let's talk about how things have been for this past year, this pandemic year. In the second quarter of 2020, near the end of the first quarter, and in the second quarter of 2020, about 75% to 80% of our clients are in the small, medium business space. Some of you might be there. And as the pandemic began hitting everybody and things began getting at least slowed down, if not shut down for so many of our clients, they stopped spending money. Makes perfect sense, right? So our second quarter of last year, from a monetary point of view, was not good. But we were super busy because our clients were wanting to make sure that they can continue to run their businesses in this pandemic environment where they weren't going to get to be on site, or only a few of them were going to get to be on site. And fortunately, IBM I is prepared for that. You can do lots and lots of things with IBM I without having to be connected to it physically, obviously, or being in the same location. There are many of the applications that took advantage of being able to do things with mobile devices, or things that you could do on your phone, and websites and so on. So our clients transitioned fairly easily to being able to run their businesses. And as IBM I, were not the reason that they had trouble with the pandemic, and that was great, but they needed a bunch of help. They needed some assurance about how things were going to work and what was there and so on. And so we, in development and outreach, the part of our jobs that we do to talk to clients, we were very busy. Well, that second quarter of last year, again, financially was not good in a compare point of view, but the work that we did with clients was very good. And by the time we got to the third quarter of last year, IBM I began to grow. So even though it was in 2020, it was a pandemic year, even though people were shut down, even though we were comparing ourselves to a pretty good year in 2019, we actually grew in the third quarter and the fourth quarter and the first quarter of 2021. Now we are on the tail end of the Power 9 family's lifespan, and it is atypical for businesses, our part of the business, Power Systems part of the business, to grow on the tail end of a family. And yet IBM I grew in the third, fourth, and first quarter that we've had. Why? Because the clients who depended upon IBM I began to see that they could continue to do things on IBM I even in this pandemic environment, and in fact they could bring more workloads or expand their existing workloads. Now, some of our clients, the large clients in particular, who are in financial, who are in insurance, who are in healthcare, they were growing and adding more capacity to their workload just to deal with what they had to deal with in the pandemic. That helped. But a lot of our clients in the small, medium business space also started adding more workloads to IBM I because their other platforms were not quite as well prepared for that. So other platforms, read competitive platforms, because by and large, our small and medium business clients who use IBM I are using it to run their major portion of the business, and the other platforms they have are doing other little workloads that are key to their business, but they're not the core thing, and they're usually on a competitive platform. So it was good to be able to solve clients' business problems during this time. It was really good to see them respond by adding more workloads, spending more money with us, and taking advantage of the integrated reliability of the platform to be able to do what they need to do. So that's a key thing to recognize as we go through the rest of this presentation. It is also a thing that's recognized within IBM. IBM appreciates that a part of the business was growing like we were during that time frame. I'm not saying the rest of the business wasn't. I'm just saying that this is a recognizable thing within our business results, and they want to make sure that we address what our clients are going to be needing as they start doing more of that reinvestment. So what are we going to do? Well, one of the things that's key to the IBM I ecosystem, to our plan and our strategy, is getting input from our clients. This chart talks about sort of two sides of that. Number one, how do we get input? And number one is how we get input. Number two is what the result is. On the left-hand side, just in case you were not aware, we talk to clients a lot and have them help us set our priorities for individual things that we do. Our strategy is our strategy, and they're pretty much in line with it. So that's not what we need help with. What we need help with is deciding which of the thousands of RFEs, requests for enhancements, that we get for IBM I, which ones are going to make the biggest difference to our client set. And so we have advisory councils. The small and medium business folks give us feedback through the Common and Common Europe advisory councils. Our largest users, about 100 companies who use IBM I on the largest power systems, get together and give us requirements for the high end. Then we have our solution vendors and our tool vendors who meet with us in advisory council and help us to know what they need for the future to help drive our interwoven clients. And then we do some interlock development and so on. Plus, as I was talking about before things began, we do customer briefings and planning sessions. And while we haven't been able to do anything face-to-face, I've been busier than ever doing virtual events with clients who want to know how to move forward. And they give us, by asking us how to do the next thing they want to do, that's a method of giving to us the requirements. This is the problem they're trying to solve. We got to make sure we have something in place to handle that. And that is one key component to IBM I having a net promoter score, which is better than most anything else in the company, in the industry. I don't put anybody else down for what their NPS score is. It's hard to get folks to have a high degree of satisfaction with a product. But our client base is passionate about this platform, sees the value of this platform, and appreciates the ability to affect the things that go into our plan. And so as we talk through here, we're going to be talking about how we factor in that client input and therefore the kinds of things that we are delivering to do what they want us to do. So we have to satisfy what the clients want. We also have to satisfy what our business is asking us to do. IBM's Power Systems is focused right now, and has been now for a year and a half to 2 years, on saying, okay, the value of our platform historically with our clients is in these operating systems that have these core workloads which work really well. AIX and IBM I carry forward with them a great many workloads that have been tuned over time to do exactly what our clients want. In addition to that, many of those clients want to figure out how to take advantage of cloud. They want to take advantage of Linux. So let's, as a brand, try to help them move forward by modernizing their applications to take advantage of both sides of this. When we talk about hybrid cloud or when we talk about Linux, we are never talking about moving off of the existing operating systems, AIX and IBM I. We're always talking about enhancing the value of that with additional technologies. That is one of the biggest messages you're going to get from me throughout this whole presentation. And what I want to point out to you is that's the strategy for IBM with IBM Power Systems. Okay, so as we roll into our next family, we're trying to get people to adopt the next family of processor technology, but not by just switching over to use only Linux all the time. That's not the answer. It might be the answer for some clients. That's great. That's fine. but many of our clients have significant value in the existing operating system environments that they have. Certainly that's the case for IBM I. I'm not here to talk about AIX, but I've talked to my AIX brethren, and that's the case for them too. So what do our clients care about from the point of view of the platform they're running on? Well, this is from the Help Systems survey that gets done annually to the IBM I community. They always ask, what are your top concerns as you plan your IT environment? I've grabbed the first, I guess, 10 of them from the list so that I can specifically focus on the fact that modernizing applications is always one of the biggest things they have. Modernizing as opposed to replatforming, and we'll get into that, is what our clients are concerned about. They have value. They want that value to take advantage of modern technology. Now, right next to that, in the top concerns is pretty much always IBM I skills as well. Okay, our client base, and this is true across the entire industry for any platform, including Windows, that has been around for a long time. People get used to the people that they have in their organizations who have a specific set of skills, and many times those skills grew up 20 years ago. And the executive concern is that they won't be able to find those skills from 20, 30 years ago. But if your platform, as IBM I has, modernizes what it does, you can bring in skills. And so we're not just talking about modernizing from an application point of view. We're also talking about modernizing your workforce. And soon, once I get there, we'll be talking about modernizing in a management and cloud environment. We're not quite there yet, though. I want to take us in this modernizing applications vein for a little bit before I make the transition to modernizing that includes the cloud. But I promise we'll get there. I'm so happy that Joe invited me to do this. I have a lot longer to build this story because you folks are used to listening to things for 75 to 90 minutes as opposed to the last event I just did. Every presentation I did had to be 20 minutes long. It's hard to build this sort of story out in 20 minutes. So anyway, I hope you'll learn something from this. Now, as I mentioned, there's a lot of focus from our clients on modernization, and there are a lot of reasons that modernization gets brought up. Skills is one of those. You saw that on the previous chart. But it's also a matter of, are you wanting to do business processes that are hard to do with your existing application? Do you want to do DevOps and continuous integration, continuous deployment with traditional applications written the way they were in the 1990s and early 2000s? That's hard to do. If you want to take advantage of that, you need some modernization to happen. Are you seeing that the tools that your developers that you're hiring, the tools they're used to using are tools that could really provide benefit to your company, but they don't work so well with the existing code that you have, or they don't work as well in a cloud environment and you want to adopt cloud? There are all sorts of factors that drive modernization. It's not just about using open technology, and it's not just about cloud. It's about a lot of different things. In our IBM I space, people tend to think that the applications that are running on our platform are solution platforms that they buy from vendors. And historically, that's the case. It's still that way for a large set of our clients. If you look at the Help Systems survey and look at the applications running on IBM I, you'll see a few vendors that have double digits of representation in our client base that answers the surveys. You'll see a few more that have, single digits, but we literally have thousands of ISVs with active, supported, and enhanced packages that run on this platform. And most of those thousands couldn't possibly even reach the 1% mark, okay? Yet they're out there, they're serving our clients. So we got to talk to those ISVs about how to modernize using IBM I. That's absolutely true. However, the bar I'll just reveal to you here is that that the survey shows that a large percentage of our clients also have code written for their organization. Some of them only write their own code. So they have development shops and they do their own development and they don't have any purchase package at all. Many of them have purchased packages and then have code written specifically for their organization to interact with their solution vendors. So as we're talking about modernizing applications, we have to talk to all of our client base, not just our solution vendors. And that's critical because I think certainly a lot of executives who think about this platform, think about historically when the only reason you used AS400 was because you had an AS400 application. And while that's still true for a lot of people, the native application that runs on IBM I still drives that. That is not the only place that needs modernization. And so we have to get this message out to everyone. The key question that our clients are having to answer for themselves as they think about modernizing their IT infrastructure is, should you modernize what you have, or should you replatform? Should you go to a different operating system because somebody is telling you that you can get some good result from that? And you can guess where I'm going to go with that, but that's the key question that they have. What's the difference? Well, modernizing adds value to existing assets. Modernizing protects the value that you've created over the years. Many of our clients are successful because throughout the last 10, 15, 20, 30 years, they have used the applications they develop on IBM I or use on IBM I to create business practices, data models, to create a competitive advantage for themselves against their competition. That level of business knowledge, the intelligence that they have built in, is very hard to replicate moving to a different platform, and that has significant value. What they want to do is modernize by extending that value. Many of our clients want to be able to use new user interfaces. They want to get services that are available on other software, maybe on their system, maybe somewhere else. They want to be able to get more value from their data that's stored in DB2, but maybe the way that it's initially stored 30 years ago doesn't lend itself very well, for example, to be managed and queried via SQL. Maybe you can't do analytics very easily. So there's modernization that extends that value in a lot of different ways. Okay, so modernizing is clearly something that people are thinking about, but they also have to decide whether they would be better off instead just starting all over again on a different platform. That replatforming thing, okay? What kinds of modernization do we see our clients doing out there in the world? Well, I deal with a great many clients, so does my team. Clearly the first thing that people have done in modernizing is user interface, but it's not that it's all done. There are still clients out there using green screen and they're devoted to it and they would like to move forward at some point, but they haven't gotten there yet. That's true. But more and more these days, it's about transforming their database to be able to take advantage of SQL, integrating cloud-based services so that they can do things that their IBM I probably doesn't have native applications to be able to do, but somewhere out there in the cloud, it can add business value to their business processes. They might want to do something like getting real-time input from sensors and other IoT devices. And again, not necessarily something that naturally would have been written in RPG, COBOL, C, etc., the traditional languages that people use on the platform. So they need to modernize somehow to be able to incorporate those things. Being able to guide robotic, automated manufacturing, distribution, and so on. We have so many clients doing that sort of thing. All sorts of modernization are going on. Now, I'm telling you this. I built this chart before I even saw this next chart. This is my experience. I have seen clients doing all these kinds of modernization. Well, there was a paper recently produced by IDC that actually went out and surveyed lots and lots and lots of clients, both for Z and I. This is the I specific chart about the modernization initiatives that are going on in the IBM I marketplace. Internet of Things, analytics, hybrid cloud, artificial intelligence. Those are the top 4 things when they went out and surveyed our clients that those clients were doing with IBM I and modernizing. Internet of Things, that often makes people say, what? IBM I and Internet of Things? Why would that be the case? Historically, our client base is in manufacturing, distribution, transportation, logistics. In today's modern manufacturing environment, robots are used. Robots are run by very sensitive sensors with code that comes with those sensors. So if you're a manufacturer these days, you don't just have your business side running an RPG and SQL set of software, you also have the side that's running your manufacturing line. And so they want to connect those two things. I have client examples of that in a couple of minutes. I'll show them to you. Okay. Same sort of thing in distribution and shipping. You've got to be able to have a way to read and keep track of all the sensors of the vehicles that are going out and delivering things, of the packages that are inside getting scanned, so they're, you know, the location of everything. That's all Internet of Things. And rather than implementing that on some other platform and finding a way to bridge the data back to the business processes, they are doing initiatives on IBM I. So these are the things that we are seeing people do on IBM I. Now, in today's environment, a competitor will often walk into our client and say, oh, but if you want to be modern, you got to get to cloud. And by the way, folks, they'll say, this is the competitors, and by the way, some partners, frustrated with those partners. Anyway, they'll say, you've got to get to cloud, and that means moving off of IBM I. And that's simply wrong. It just is so wrong. I wrote a blog about this. It's one of my most frequently read blogs for this year. It's called IBM I and Cloud, and it's one of the reasons why I titled and themed this presentation this way. It's really about IBM I and the cloud, adding the value of cloud to what you have on IBM I rather than IBM I or the cloud. And we'll talk for the rest of this presentation on the several different ways that I mean. So remember this survey, Modernizing and IBM I skills. Well, the thing that's over on the most right-hand side there is migrating applications to the cloud. That's what our clients are concerned about. Now, this is interesting, by the way, if you just step back, everything that you've been told by the IT industry for the past 5 years has said that everybody is moving to the cloud. That's clearly not the case for our IBM I marketplace. 25% of them said that's a concern of theirs, but they aren't moving there. They are trying to figure out what they've got to do to modernize their applications and whether migrating applications to the cloud is part of it. It has shown up now as number, whatever that is, number 8 or 9 or 10 on this list. Okay, and that's important for us to pay attention to, and we have been. We've been preparing for this for quite some time. But in the IBM I space, the first thing they're asking for is not cloud. And so when our competitors walk in and say, if you want to be modern, you got to go to the cloud, that is not resonating with IBM I clients as much as the competitors thought it would. Nevertheless, it raises thoughts in their minds, and there is value to be had in the cloud. So our strategy has been, well, what I'm going to be talking about for the rest of this presentation. If you go back and look at the modernization initiatives that have been going on in IBM I, that chart I just showed you a couple minutes ago, you'll notice clearly hybrid cloud and offering things or consuming things as a service in a cloud certainly are one of the things that our clients have been doing. If you dig a little bit deeper and look at a couple more things, microservices and the API ecosystem, while they do not have to be done in a cloud, they are core components of what the cloud provides. It's what a competitor will walk in and say, you've got to get to the cloud because then you can take advantage of these microservices that are out there and you don't have to write this code again. While that's well true, there are clients, IBM I clients, who are doing modernization and doing microservices in an API ecosystem and involving IBM I. And AI, of course, if you want to get value from AI, most of those AI services like Watson are available in clouds somewhere. So clearly there are clients doing that with IBM I. A few of them are putting machine learning, for example, on IBM I because you can do that, but that's not what most of them are doing. What most of them are doing is reaching out to the cloud. In fact, basically everything that is modernization here can be sold to a client as preparing them for a cloud environment. And in fact, that's the case. And if you look at my list, all this blue stuff is certainly stuff that's related to cloud these days. So Clients who may have started out modernizing for one particular thing are finding that that's in fact something that they can do in a cloud environment. For many years now, part of our strategy, a key component of our strategy, has been giving clients choices on how they move forward with their applications. And a key part of that is the hybrid application development strategy. We have the world's best, I claim, the world's best relational database management system, DB2 I'll claim it's best. And to interact with that, we have RPG and COBOL, but RPG in particular, which has been tuned over 40 years to be able to do DB2 really, really well. And we have SQL. So we have, on the left-hand side, a lot of business processes that are tuned very well to do exactly what you need, but we also can do almost all of the open source stuff that people want to do on IBM I exactly the same way as you do it on other platforms. So if you want to do DevOps, if you want to do microservices, if you want to consume data that's coming in from the Internet of Things, you can use the same code that's been put on a Linux platform on x86 somewhere. You can put that on IBM I and incorporate that with what you're doing. This hybrid application development strategy has been key to showing clients that they don't need to involve another operating system to get the value as they add modern technology. We've given these people choices by having almost 400 different open source packages. Again, the same packages that are available for everybody else on every other platform. Those same packages can run on IBM I. And we've been investing in making sure that RPG, COBOL, Java all have modern capabilities associated with the standards so that you can put both of those things together. And in fact, that's what our clients are doing. There are lots of options that have great value from those modern languages. And so people are adding Python, Node.js, etc., to their existing platform, getting new incremental value, usually by hiring young people who have those skills and can apply them directly. Not always, because of course some of their existing development staff wants to learn, is anxious to learn how to use these new technologies, and so they learn them as well. But it is one of the ways that we address that IBM I skills concern by allowing clients to hire somebody out of school who's never heard of our platform, but who can use the same skills they learned in school with Python, Perl, PHP, Node, whatever, and do the same thing on IBM I. So typically, the projects for modernization start by adding incremental value with new open source software, connecting it to the back-end business processes. And we have lots and lots and lots of client stories. I have highlighted these three for a couple of reasons. You'll see as I go through the presentation why. Crass is a manufacturer. They have run on IBM I for a very long time, since before it was called IBM I, obviously. Okay, and they ran their business that way. As they turned to robotics, they were able to incorporate open source software that was written to manage the manufacturing robots that they needed to be able to cut wood, build furniture, etc. Okay, and because it was open source software written in languages that we support on IBM I, they were able to put it on IBM I and easily connect back to DB2, so they could know what kind of supplies they needed to go into the robotics manufacturing line. Okay, and when a project was done, that they could make that available as part of their inventory to the inventory part of what's running on IBM I. The ability to do that was very powerful for them, and they did not have to rip and replace. They did not have to invest in a new set of software to be able to do that. They were able to just modernize around it. Fibrosit is a similar company, but not only did they do modern robotics-based manufacturing, they also do modern 3D visualization design of the piece that's going to get manufactured before it goes into the manufacturing line. And to do that, they needed open source software that could visualize and adapt to the various needs of a customer. That visualization software that fed into their manufacturing line runs in open source. That open source package runs on IBM I, and you get the idea, okay? CubePack is a US company that does the same kind of thing, but it grows flowers. It uses sensors to detect humidity, the sense to sense how humid the air is, how humid the soil is. They have robots essentially going around watering plants and that sort of thing and keeping track of how healthy they are. So again, these clients have been using traditional and open married together rather than assuming that they were going to have to spend lots of money to do a replatform environment. Now, what I want to tell you is that all this modernization that I've told you about so far that they've done hasn't involved the cloud at all. But the same sorts of things that you do to prepare your environment, your application to run in this modern environment of doing open software plus your traditional software, okay, is the same thing that you got to do if you're going to modernize to take advantage of what's out there and available in the cloud. And so these clients are now starting to see that if they want to do cloud-based things, they've already begun on the path. IBM I does modern all very well on its own. You can do modern things, and lots of clients are doing that. But often, to achieve the kind of business value or business strategy that people have, they want to interact with high performance enterprise services that are running in other platforms, or they want to have adjacent IBM I workloads somewhere else, or services that are provided by some other platform. And rather than rewrite them, of course, we would want to work with those. Well, that's basically just incorporating cloud services into their existing application structure. In order to do that, the existing applications have often to be refactored so that they can consume services from out in a cloud environment and provide services to that cloud environment. Refactoring is something that many of you are probably aware of, but I am going to go through a little bit of what I mean by refactoring so that I can make it clear that the same sorts of things they've been doing to modernize in those other traditional ways are being used and can be used to modernize for a cloud environment. You see, this is where we get into the original title of this presentation. IBM I's applications, the applications that run on IBM I, really become next generation when they consider the fact that everything that they're doing can be perceived as a business process or a module that provides value to their company. And if they think of it as a service, it becomes something that, like other services in a cloud environment, can be made available to their whole organization, as well as their suppliers, as well as their customers. In order to do that, you need to be prepared to modernize your existing high-value business processes in a way that is modular, usually that uses multiple programming languages so that you have the right programming language for the right service that you're providing, so that you can produce and consume services. So if you've got a service that you do, for example, for on your site, you do tickets for your organization, or you do a particular delivery for your manufacturing thing. If that's your service, make it into a service, and then you can collaborate with things that are in a cloud somewhere. Now you can, on the left-hand side, run this entirely in your own shop, but then reach out to a cloud that might be running on who knows what on the right-hand side. Okay, now I've got the cloud being run on IBM Power Systems because I want you to run clouds with IBM Power Systems. But if it's a different cloud, that's fine. You can still have your IBM I on the left-hand side reaching out and getting services from stuff that's in a different cloud. Okay, and if those applications, if you write applications in that cloud, they can be getting services from IBM I if you have modularized your code, made them into services, and so on. So that's one way to view things. Okay, that's hybrid in the sense that IBM I is running in your data center and then it is interacting with a cloud. That's hybrid cloud. Okay, or if you'll notice on the right-hand side, but the lower left-hand corner of the right-hand side, you can have your existing VM-based apps sitting in a cloud somewhere. For example, IBM's cloud, running Power Systems in IBM's cloud. And that could be where your IBM I stuff is running. And now the services that you're providing are coming from a cloud itself. Okay, an actual public cloud. If that's where you're running your workloads, that's fine. But in order to do all this, again, you come back to, should I refactor and do this modernization, or should I replatform? I'm being told by competitors that I'll be better off if I just rewrite this all and start fresh, and I'll replatform. Well, this IDC study that I was mentioning before that studied both Z and I and how clients are doing modernization actually did some comparisons. There have been clients who've left both Z and I and replatformed. So they did a comparison of the results of replatforming versus modernizing. Remember, replatforming, you don't have anything left of what you started with. You've rewritten that all on some other platform. Modernizing, you keep the value of what you have on your existing platform, you add things to it. And they compared the resulting applications, and here's what they found. In terms of customer experience, modernized applications were better. In other words, the people who use the applications found them better. In terms of performance, it was better. In terms of security, availability, disaster recovery, it was better. Guess what? In every case, in every aspect of those applications, if you had a similar application and you replatformed it, it wasn't as good in the end as that application if you had added value by modernizing. Now, the paper will also talk about it. Another paper I'm going to refer you to will talk about the fact that it probably cost you 2 to 5 to 10 times as much to replatform. It also took you 2 to 5 times as long to replatform, and you ended up with a result that was worse in every quantifiable way. Okay. Now I know this is self-serving. I want you to stay on IBM I, but I don't just want you to stay on IBM I because it's better for me, but also because time and time again, it has shown that it's better for you. I just want you to be aware of that. I have dealt with clients who have had multi-million-dollar, multi-year projects to try to get the same value out of IBM I, or out of their new platform as they did out of IBM I, and they can't. Now, if you're an IBM I client, I think you'll understand why that is. DB2 on IBM I, for example, learns how you use your data. It, underneath the covers, automatically balances things so that you will get better performance for that. That's part of our value proposition. If you move to a different platform, even if it's DB2 on that different platform, and usually it isn't, if they replatform, they almost always replatform away from IBM. Okay, but no matter what, you don't have that. You have to hire people to investigate how your data is being used, and you have to make part of their job rebalancing things to make things better. So that is just one of many examples of something that is built into the operating system that you have to somehow find a way to compensate for on a different platform. The other part of it is that you have decades worth of business processes that have built up, and moving to a different platform, you will almost never get all of that right, almost never. Okay, and so it can be very difficult between those two aspects, the value of IBM I plus the inherent things that you've written over the years, okay, to become the same. So one of the great papers that talks about this is actually a Gartner report. We didn't have anything to do with them writing this report. Again, they looked at the difference between clients who wanted to move and the clients who stayed on the platform for both Z and I. And they just point out that if you remove the emotion from the decision-making process and look at what your current platform can do, not what it's being used to do, but what it can do, you will find it to be a far less risky and less costly undertaking to do modernization than to leave the platform entirely. It was a good story. We have a very recent story, analyst paper from Forrester who says similar things. So now let's move into what this means for moving into the cloud. This IBM I Next Gen application that we're talking about is, as I mentioned, modular, usually written in multiple languages. taking advantage of the capabilities of those multiple languages. So this is just sort of a picture that kind of shows that if you're on the right-hand side and you're dealing with the database, you probably want to have a module, a service that's written in a language that deals with that database very well. But if you're talking to a cloud service, you probably want something written in a language that does services really well. It can be Java, or it can be something simpler like Node.js or PHP or something like that. And if you want to be able to talk to various user interfaces, again, there are languages that are very good at that. So your next-gen application structure is more modular, probably in multiple languages, fit to purpose. What are you going to be doing with that particular module? Your traditional software that runs your traditional back end of your shop is probably the basis of what you have on the right-hand side, and you probably keep your RPG or your Java, whatever you've been doing that stuff in. Okay, now you modularize it better to make it capable of doing services. Okay, but you don't have to move your languages to make that happen. So how do our clients get from where they are to this next-gen application structure? Well, typically, when clients wanted to modernize their green screen, they would go through a process where they would look at their software. It was big, it was unwieldy, it was lots of code in one place. They would find a piece of it that they needed to modernize, and they would change the screen for that one piece by refactoring out the one piece of code that dealt with one of their functions, and then turning that refactored code into something that had a different user interface. Instead of green screen, it would be mobile or it would be web. Okay. Well, that same refactoring process happens so frequently that there are a lot of tools in the industry to help you find and extract, refactor that logic associated with doing displays. The same stuff exists to be able to refactor and find logic and pull it out and make it a module that does your business processing, not just your user interface. Our clients are already used to this sort of thing. Now, I mentioned here on this chart that Rational Developer for I, the tool that we sell, has a refactoring tool. It's not the only one out there. If you're using another modernization vendor, they probably have a tool that will help you analyze what your existing code is and they refactor. I'm not saying you have to use RDI. I'm saying there are tools out there that do that. Okay, RDI has a fairly simple one. Once you have refactored that business logic, the next thing you need to do to move into next gen and cloud capable stuff is to turn that into a service that can be called to from the cloud. Well, again, there are tools out there. In fact, we ship one with Ibm I in IWS. It's called the REST API engine. And anything that's been compiled down into a module, whether it's RPG or an SQL stored procedure or whatever, anything that's an ILE compiled program can be wrapped to turn it into a service. It's a sort of an automatic, simple tool that you have. And now that service can be called by an application. That application can be on your same system, or it could be out in a cloud somewhere. You could have written a container app that wants to take advantage of this procedure, this service, which in this case is a simple thing about computing ticket price. But you get the point. Whatever it is that your business process is that you've created a service about, a containerized application sitting out there in the service or sitting out there in the cloud can do that. And then with the data that it gets, it can go off and do whatever it wants. Maybe it's going to do some analytics, or it's going to share it with some other software or whatever. Okay. And your entire environment then can incorporate your IBM I services with the services that are being used by the other stuff that's out in the cloud. By the way, the same kind of technology can allow your existing compute ticket price procedure written in RPG to call out to a service that's out there in the cloud as well. So you can do both directions. This is fairly standard. It's being used on a regular basis by the folks who are doing their own development, by the partners that we have out there who are helping modernize clients. Usually you have to have a bunch of different tools that you get involved. So I recognize it can be a little complex, but I can also tell you it is significantly less complex than trying to analyze all your code and rewrite it onto a different platform. So we've talked about how to take applications and turn them into next-gen applications so that they can be used in a cloud. But what about What about if you just want to run your IBM I installation, your business as it is, in a cloud environment? I'm going to talk for a little bit about that before I sort of tie all this stuff together. First of all, you gotta recognize that before anybody called it a cloud, we have had software vendors and partners providing services in their own IT infrastructures across the internet to our clients. That's a cloud. It may not be a cloud like kick up a microservice and it lives for 45 milliseconds and goes away. Maybe that's not the kind of cloud it is, but it's running business for clients where they don't have to own the systems at all. They just use the services. Jack Henry and Associates, one of my favorite examples, they are a banking software vendor. They have over 400 small banks running in one partition of IBM I, keeping all of that work running separately so that no one can see anybody else's data, so that nobody's jobs interfere with other people's jobs. They've been providing a cloud IBM I banking service to many, many, many clients for years, and they continue to do that. Okay, Connectory and MorePlay, all these people have been doing that sort of thing. But if you want to talk about the more modern definition of cloud, where we're doing public cloud things, well, you can do that with IBM I today too. Now, again, you can go to our partners and you can get individual managed IBM I instances, and that is a great thing for a lot of our clients. But if you want to run a virtual server in IBM's cloud, that's been available for quite some time now. If you go to IBM's cloud catalog and get the Power Systems virtual server, what you're essentially getting is a virtual IBM I. You choose what release you want, you choose the size of the system that you want, and you can run things. They're currently on IBM's cloud in the Power Virtual Server. There are ISV applications being offered that way. There are full enterprises that have moved their entire workloads to the cloud. I'll give you an example of that in a minute. We have a bunch of our clients who have decided, rather than having their own small partition or small box doing test development and backup in their own sites, they're using IBM I in IBM's cloud to do exactly that. So that's out there and available, and we have a lot of clients who are using it, and probably more over time as people want to have IBM do the management of their physical hardware. The clients still manage essentially the virtual machine. So you still manage doing the PTFs and the upgrades and so on. So the customer portal gives you that virtual machine. The virtual machine is running on hardware that's managed by IBM, and then you take care of the platform that is provided for you. These are just some of the details. I've put it here mostly because you'll have it on the PDF if you want to take a look at it. Just showing you that you can scale from small to large. It doesn't really matter, and you can do it all around the world. There are a lot of, I think we're up to 13 or 14 different data centers around the world to make sure that you've got a data center nearby that can handle it. And that allows you then to have your IBM I running in your own environment if you want to, or you can have IBM I running in this Power Systems cloud somewhere else. In the IBM I development team, which is what I'm responsible for, our job has been strategically to make sure that you can do either one of these or both technologically. The actual offering doesn't have anything to do with me. I don't make any decisions about how much it costs. I don't make any decisions about where it's going to be offered. We have had some requirements placed on us to allow us to do licensing slightly differently because we're in a cloud environment now and that sort of thing. But most of that is all the business side of running IBM's cloud. From a strategic point of view, from a platform point of view, we needed to make sure that IBM I could run as well in that cloud environment as it does in an on-prem environment, your own IT shop. Because we recognize that clients need to have choices about where they're going to do things. Some of our clients really care about running in a cloud, and some of them really care about having physical control over their own stuff. And there are business reasons for both. And so there's no way that we were going to limit our clients. We needed to provide the ability to run in those environments. Now, during the pandemic, one of our longtime clients, ID Logistics in France, actually moved during the pandemic their entire IBM I production workloads into the IBM Cloud. One of the reasons that they did that was because until the pandemic came, they kept an on-site physical staff with their IBM I on Power system, and they saw how difficult that was going to be in the pandemic. So they started working with IBM about moving their entire workload into the IBM cloud so they wouldn't have to require their people to physically be on site. They could still have their operators connecting remotely to be able to manage their virtual machines, their partitions of IBM I, but they wouldn't have to do physical stuff. And so they were able to successfully do exactly that. This is one of the 80 client stories we currently have out on that client innovation page that's down at the bottom there, that link, the bit.ly link for IBM I client innovation. This is one of those stories. And it's not the only story that we have that highlights IBM I in various clouds. This one specifically is in IBM's cloud. It's a proof point that we're allowed to use as a client example. We have a much bigger client than this who has moved their entire workload into the IBM cloud. ID Logistics is pretty big, by the way, so don't get me wrong, it's pretty big. It's just we have a much bigger client. They just haven't allowed us to use, the bigger client has not allowed us to use them as a public reference yet. So there are clients of all sizes who are looking at IBM I in IBM's cloud so that they don't have to physically be near their power system, and that's fine. In fact, it's a great story. It's showing that the strategy that we have has really come to fruition in being able to allow this. Brainstaff Consultants in Japan has a slightly different version of how they use IBM's cloud. They actually have their IBM I stuff still in their own data center, but they've incorporated their IBM I workloads with Watson. And so IBM's cloud is providing a bunch of machine learning chatbot services that are available out there in IBM's cloud and interacting with IBM I on their physical system. They have seen how well that has gone, that they are now evaluating if there are pieces of their IBM I workload that they want to put in IBM's cloud so that it's up there in that same cloud. That's what it looks like to the clients. It's in the same cloud as Watson because it's all just part of IBM's cloud, right? The fact that it's implemented as an infrastructure slightly differently and there's co-location going on doesn't matter to them, right? What matters to them is they might get out of the business of managing their physical servers. They haven't done that yet, but they have taken advantage of the cloud services that are available from IBM in IBM's cloud to do Watson. And it's a great story. Great story. They were able to really advance what they were doing for the students who use the data that they're running, because they're a consultant that runs schools, and so has to be able to answer at a moment's notice a request that comes in from a student of one of the many schools that they operate. We have, as I mentioned, about 80 different client stories currently active, and many of them involve not only modernization, and they all basically involve modernization of one form or another, but many of them also involve using cloud services. On the upper left here, there's a company in Italy who is using Alexa to do their user interface for their non-technical employees. Their non-technical employees will ask Alexa in Italian to get some analytical data from IBM I or to schedule something or whatever. And Alexa interacts with IBM I in the background to be able to do that. That is not only voice recognition, it is not only translation into a different language, it is not only connecting back to back-end stuff, it's also cloud because Alexa does all its work by talking up to a cloud to get that information. On the bottom right, or sorry, bottom left, is an example of what I was mentioning earlier. In our traditional business space, we have a lot of clients who do transportation and logistics. And so we have a client who has real-time tracking of all of their fleet of trucks, as well as real-time tracking of where all of the cargo, the pieces of cargo that are in those trucks are, so that as they move out of the truck into storage locations or onto another truck or wherever it needs to go, they can track that as it goes on. And that is that real-time sensor stuff that's going on. And more of that is being used by communicating with clouds and connecting various suppliers to one another so that they can hand things off from one entity to another in a cloud transaction. All of this modernization that we're talking about, whether it is cloud connected or not, ends up following a bunch of different patterns that you'll need to go through as you're deciding how you want to modernize. Often the first step that you have to go through is discovering what are the various applications I have and what are the services that they provide. And then you often move into exposing those APIs as services. But most clients these days actually are, well, maybe it's not most, but a high percentage of our clients are actually starting with, I want to be able to respond to business needs by being more agile in developing new capabilities for my business application and rolling them out into production as quickly as I can. And so they're looking at, how can I do this thing called DevOps? How can I do continuous integration, continuous delivery of new capabilities? And that ability to be responsive and to change business processes on the fly is actually driving those top two things. They're saying, okay, what are the pieces of my application that need to change most frequently? And let me turn those into services so that I can do DevOps around them. In any case, all these different steps are fairly well recognized in the industry. This is not an IBM I chart so much as it is an industry chart about what it takes to modernize your application environment. It's about doing these management of the application more than it is about a specific need. And that's critical to the future of this platform, IBM I in particular. I am working with my team right now on how to better provide offerings that fit into these patterns. We do have some pieces, as I showed you in that 1, 2, 3 step chart. We have some pieces that can help you there, but we think we can do more. And if you just continue to watch this space, next year when I come back and talk to you, I'll have some pretty exciting things to talk about that will help clients. But clients are doing this right now without any new tooling from us, with the tooling that's there because they need to, and they're looking to us for help. So part of what I'm doing with this this presentation and the presentations I'm doing all year is to let people know what they can do today, and then in the future I'll tell them more about things that we'll produce that can help them into the future. Because what you need to do today, you have to do with the things that are available today. If you want to find out more about this stuff, I do encourage you to follow us in the places where we'll be talking about it most and first. The IBM I homepage on IBM.com is absolutely critical. This is where you find out all of the new strategic information as well as the new enhancements that we're doing. From that page, you can get to our strategy white paper. Allison Butterell and I have just finished revising this for 2021 so that we can more clearly articulate the need for modernization and processes around those applications in the cloud, hybrid cloud environment in particular, while still relying on the value that you get from IBM I architecturally and historically and so on. So that's one of the pieces that's there, and it's beginning to hint at some of the things that clients have to do to modernize. Our Power Systems community now out there, hopefully all of you who have joined it, I understand that one of the ways that this virtual user group advertised this webcast was through the community. So if you came through that way, great. If you guys came from some other direction and don't know about the community, join the community, because there is a spot for each of the operating systems. IBM I, this is where a lot of the stuff that we're doing gets announced. In fact, that's where my blog is now. So I have a blog and I post things on a fairly regular basis, including the IBM I and Cloud post that I talked about before, which has many of the messages that I have talked about in this presentation more concisely written perhaps, but not with as much detail as what I've been able to do here for you today, as well as a bunch of other things that you might want to find. The key topics that I do about roadmaps. If you want to see the roadmaps, there's a post out there about that. There is soon to be a new post that has all of the most recent analyst papers that you might find useful, etc. So you'll want to go there for that. Hopefully by now, almost all of you are at least using Twitter to follow the key information from people that you need to hear from. You might not be tweeting, you might not be following stars and celebrities, but if you're out there following hashtag IBMI or hashtag IBMI open source software or me, you'll be getting information about new things that are available on IBMI. And this is one of the places where I've been talking about what a next generation application is and who's working with us on doing that sort of thing and so on. So I want you to know that that stuff is out there. And again, when you have the PDF for this, you'll have many of these links so that you can take advantage of them. Within IBM, we have a couple of organizations that really help out as clients want to do modernization. And I did want to point them out. I did a modernization webcast with the folks from Lab Services and the IBM Garage about a month and a half ago. It's out there still for replay if you want to go listen to it. It has some of the stuff that I was talking about, but it has a little more detail about what the IBM Garage can do for you and what Lab Services could do for you, because we do have folks trained within IBM to help you modernize what you have. In other words, keep the value of what you have, but add new technology. And through the IBM Garage, they have workshop sessions that can help you do that. They can help you discover what you've got, design what you want to add to it, and then they can do some consulting to help you get where you want to go. That is one of the ways you can go. Another way you can go is to work with our lab services team. Again, they have key skills who are very, very educated and experienced with IBM I and can help you to keep the value of what's there, but then maybe build yourself a CI/CD pipeline that can be used for your new applications and ultimately the applications that run on IBM I, and so on. So Lab Services has a foot in this game as well, a card to play here. They have a whole design and transformation workshop that they could do for you. And while I'm not here to sell either of these services to you, I want you to be aware that if you feel like there's nobody out there who can tell you how to do this stuff, well, you should be aware there are. Now, I've just made the Garage people and the Lab Services people happy by telling you about them. I might be making them a little bit frustrated when I also say you may have a partner that you work with who is doing this stuff already. Those stories that I showed you before of clients who modernized to do open source and do robotics and that sort of thing, they worked with business partners who had skills doing that sort of thing. And they used tools that were available to them. We also have some vendors out there who are really good at modernization, and they have some really good tools. What you have to be careful, though, of is that when you use those tools, you want to make sure that what you're trying to do is modernize, not try to get to some other platform. Because unfortunately, there are some people out there in the marketplace who will call it IBM I modernization when what they're really doing to you is switching the technology underneath the covers, therefore losing you value. So you got to be careful about that. But if you want to stay on IBM I and you make it clear that you want the value of IBM I to remain but add new capabilities, there are a lot of options out there. We're going to try to provide more of them in the future. That's absolutely true because it's so strategically important to our client base. But we have folks like the Garage and Lab Services and a bunch of software consultants out there and a bunch of partners who know how to do this stuff, and they can be engaged to do exactly that. When you go to the IBM I homepage soon, relatively soon, you will actually be able to follow a link from there to this next gen application stuff that I've been talking about. We're going to have a bunch of resources to talk about the steps that you have to take, code repositories for code that has been written. Some of that, by the way, already is on the Power Systems community pages, but it's going to grow by a factor of, well, by a couple of factors by the time we get to having this full page supported. So there will be more to look at there. I'm happy to be able to talk to you today. I certainly wouldn't have wanted to put this off until that came out, but I want you to pay attention. And if you follow me on Twitter or on LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn, and pretty much everything that I announce on Twitter, I also announce on LinkedIn. Either place, when it becomes available, you'll be able to find that by following me. Because that's what I use Twitter and LinkedIn for. I'm not looking for another job. I'm trying to make sure that the people who care about the platform can find, when something new comes out, that can find that stuff as easily as possible. So let me summarize before we then go and see if there are any questions and answers. I called this presentation IBM I Next Generation Applications, Next Gen Apps, okay, and IBM I and Cloud, because I do want you to understand IBM I in your current environment can do many things in a cloud-like way. If you want to develop your applications and use them in a cloud-like way, incorporate new open software alongside what you've got today, and you can do things in a cloud-like way. More clients of ours are doing things in cloud-like ways today than are specifically doing them in clouds, okay? And that is a perfectly valid way to do things. It makes sense for many businesses to do that. That's wonderful. Do it. You can do it. You can modernize to do that. Some of our clients are seeing value in not managing their hardware anymore and in paying for their infrastructure like you do in a cloud via consumption models, via paying per month per unit of whatever you're paying for, processor, memory, blah, blah, blah. Okay, and that's what clouds are for. Clouds aren't for doing it cheaper. They are for doing it perhaps in a more predictable way, in a way that is easier to scale up and down. But you can do a lot of that scaling up and down in today's power systems as well. So it's not about cheaper. It's about, what do you as an organization want to manage on your own, or need to because of requirements that you have from regulatory agencies and that sort of thing. Okay, so you can do it. You can do it on the left-hand side on your own. You can do it on the right-hand side, be in a cloud somewhere. But what's clear, what I hope is clear after all the time I've spent talking to you, is that when you get your applications to be these next generation applications, you can protect the investments you have in your IBM I-based data and business processes, and you can add the value of the power of the cloud. Okay, that is the core of what I've been trying to get across to you today. I think I've said it so many times, you're probably completely aware of it. But there is no reason to think this has to be an or, IBM I or the cloud. It really is about IBM I and the cloud together. That's the future of our platform. That's the future of a lot of our clients. I hope that you've seen that there is a path forward here. There are people who can help you. I really appreciate Joe's invitation to be able to get you this message now. If you are an IBM I client and you want to see where the future is, please, please follow us in those social ways, because that'll be where we'll tell you about things first. And then attend other events. As I was mentioning to Joe before things began, I have been doing more virtual events than I was ever able to do in-person events. And probably for the rest of this year, that'll be the case. When we can get back out again and see people in person, I'll be happy to do that. But take advantage of the fact that so much of what we're doing now is virtual and available to lots and lots of people just by registering for events. It is one of the best ways to keep in touch with us. Follow us on social, attend virtual events. Doesn't take much of your time, and you will be among the first people to know the newest things that we're going to do. So with that, I will end the presentation, and we'll see if there's anything on the Q&A side that I should be looking at. Joe, have you seen anything you thought?
Hi, Steve. Yeah. So I'm just scrolling through here. There's a couple things on there. One asks about a cheat sheet that describes all the different IBM I features in a sentence or two, like QU1, BR1, XW1.
Aha. Okay. Is there anything that I know of that's a cheat sheet? You know what?
Mm.
I don't know of any. That would be a great question to ask the IBMI community to see if somebody has one. I know I haven't created one I remember seeing one 15 years ago, but I'm not part of it, so I apologize for that.
All right. So I did post the link to the IBMI community out there. So
Great.
I know it was on one of your sheets, and somebody it went past them, and so I posted that out there.
Great.
And just so in case anybody missed it, the presentation is on the VUG website, so you ought to be able to go to the VUG, scroll down to the next session area. It's still there. Later today, I'll probably move this to past sessions, but it should be there, and you can pull down Steve's full presentation with all the links and everything that are in it.
Let's see. I've got a couple here that I can at least comment about. Is there a future strategy for There's a question Martin asked, sorry if I mangled your name, about future strategy for IBMI backup and restore with BRMS and not physical tape. And cloud object storage is one option. Sometimes it's far away and too slow. So yes, that is an evolving strategy. We started with what we had available to us, and if you are too far away from the data center where your cloud object storage is, or you have too much data, it can be unwieldy. We understand that. There is a future strategy for that. Keep watching space. Then there was something about optimizing the PACE POSIX environment, IBMI, and measuring and doing benchmarks. I got to tell you, benchmarks by and large are phony games where people who can screw around with the internals of things can always win. But I understand the point. Being able to make sure that we can compete well with folks who are going to run open source software specifically for high performance. And we are actually making some significant strategic investments in how we do open source and how we deal with PACE to make sure that we can do what our clients expect there. We are never going to be able to be the benchmark winner in many of these open source software things because no one can get into our kernel and mess with things the way they can in an open Linux environment. But that's not what our clients want anyway. They want a standard environment that'll compete well enough. And yes, I recognize that is a need that they want. I may be missing other things. Did you see anything else, Joe, that I should be responding to?
So the last one here, and I've heard this one before, you probably heard it many times, future plans to have IBM I on the 850, 950, future 1050 platforms.
Yep, I've heard it. So the answer is that the reason that we didn't do the 850 and the 950 was that there were hardly any clients who bought the 750. And when the 8 and 9 24s can basically fill in that same space for almost all of the clients who were on the 750s, there wasn't a business case for it. There is no, I mean, it would require investment for us to do it, and we didn't see a big business case for it. We have always said to our marketplace, if you can find a good reason business-wise to do it, we can reevaluate, but it just hasn't been necessary. So will there be on the 1050? Oh, what's a 1050? I haven't heard a 1050 announced. I don't know about the existence of a 1050, but if such a thing were announced, it would be another business case thing like that. So anyway, that's one of the answers. Yeah. And then they were talking, somebody else has asked some Power 10 questions, but except for what we've announced at Hot Chips last year, there aren't any other announcements about Power 10 right now. So
that's right. We talked about the chip, but we haven't talked about any systems yet. Nothing's been announced yet, so you all have to stay tuned for that. And as soon as something comes out, I'll definitely be booking a webinar on it.
Yep. All right.
So are there any initiatives to add IBM I VM to Amazon AWS catalog?
Okay, so again, this is really a wonderful question. I get this sort of thing all the time. If Amazon wants to buy Power and create Power images, there is nothing stopping them. but that is an Amazon question. It is not an IBM I development question. It's not even really an IBM question. Anybody who wants to build a cloud with Power Systems can. What I don't know what you've been hearing, and so I don't want to lead you down the wrong path. There are companies out there who tell you that they can move your, they call it IBM I workload into AWS. Because there is no power running IBM I in AWS, they cannot move your IBM I into AWS until AWS has Power and IBM I as part of their catalog, and it doesn't. So what are they telling you? They're telling you you move IBM I into their environment. What they're actually doing is replatforming you and claiming it's IBM I. It's not. Okay, and until or unless they actually have Power Systems that they are using to give you IBM I images, there isn't anything, and there won't be. But it's not an IBM decision. It is an AWS decision.
Right, and there are other companies that have Power Systems that run IBM I.
Absolutely.
SkyTap does it. I think
Yep.
Google does it. So there are
Yep.
other companies out there. Just I don't think not
Yes.
AWS at this time.
That's right. And that's critical to understand is that SkyTap was one of the first partners that we had that said, we want to have IBM I as a cloud offering. And they put Power Systems in their data centers to be able to make that happen. Yep.
Okay, let's see here.
I'm not selling anybody on SkyTap. I'm just saying,
right,
if you want to do
yeah.
IBM I, there are places to go there, right?
Yeah, and you know, other companies, and just I'll put a little plug in here for the IBM Cloud. You know, we have the scale out systems, S922, plus we have the scale up systems with the E880s and E980s, and I think that's what's missing in a lot of other clouds that run Power. They have the smaller systems, but they don't have the enterprise, the larger systems in their cloud usually. So there might be some exceptions out there, but that is one thing that the IBM Cloud definitely brings to the table that's an advantage. And there are other advantages too.
That's right. As far as I've seen, and I'm not out there shopping, right? As far as I've seen, you have more options for size and flexibility on IBM I than at least the first instantiations that other places were giving. So, you know, I imagine the market will drive all of those competitors to do the right thing eventually. But I think IBM was closer at the beginning to the kinds of variability there is in the IBM I marketplace. So,
yeah. Let's see. So let's. Somebody asked about Google. Can't really say what Google's going to announce.
No.
Don't know.
Don't know. Right. Well, I think we're probably to the end of the technical questions about this stuff. Really, folks, I really appreciate you listening to me today. And I know it sounds very self-serving to ask you to follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn. It isn't that I want to get so many followers. It's that I want to make sure that you all have a clear way of knowing when the next thing is that gets announced. And, you know, you can pay attention to virtual user group pages and all that stuff, but you know, when something gets announced, I'm not going to be quiet about it. I'll say it. I'll have this tweet and the LinkedIn post scheduled to go live as soon as it's available. So.
All right. Well, Steve, thanks so much for getting on, and I know you put some work into, you know, you just didn't grab your off-the-shelf presentation here because you changed it for our time slot and everything. So I really appreciate that all you did there.
No problem.
And for the community here, thanks everybody for joining today.
All right. Thanks everyone. It was great to talk to you.
Yeah, and I'll get out the next month's invite in the next probably the next couple of weeks for June. I don't have it lined up yet, so I'm still picking out the topic for it. When you're done, if you go to the survey and you have some topics you'd like to see, feel free to put in there any suggestions. I look through those and try and see what's suggested the most often and pick something that's popular and that I think everybody will like. So add your comments. With that, everyone, have a good month. Thank you.
Bye.